In Tokyo's National Sumo Hall, a 400-pound wrestler towered over a smaller man, ready to turn laughter into humiliation. What seemed like a harmless exhibition spiraled toward danger when the sumo mocked Chuck Norris's size and challenged him before a restless crowd. Chuck Norris wasn't just another celebrity in the spotlight. For over a decade, he dominated the martial arts world, serving as a U.S. Air Force air policeman before claiming 6 straight World Karate Championships, feared for his speed as much as his discipline. When the sumo colossus rushed forward with crushing force, he never realized he was charging into the grasp of a master tactician. Norris pivoted, countered, and unleashed a throw that shattered the silence and left the audience breathless. What began as mockery became legend. The arena, once echoing with laughter, would never forget the night brute's strength fell to precision, and Chuck Norris rewrote the story of the fight. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Thunder rippled through the Tokyo arena as thousands of fans leaned forward in their seats. Camera flashes burst like lightning against the darkness, illuminating the massive ring at the center, a sacred space of combat transformed tonight into a spectacle of international proportions. The air vibrated with anticipation, thick with the smell of excitement and tension. Aiko Tanaka adjusted her headset, dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, her voice carrying across the arena with practiced authority. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the International Martial Arts Exhibition. Tonight, traditions collide as warriors from across the globe test their skills, their courage, and their spirit. The crowd roared in response, a wave of sound crashing against the rafters. Banners waved, phones recorded, and chants began in both Japanese and English. The exhibition had drawn fans from across the world, martial arts enthusiasts who had paid small fortunes to witness this unprecedented gathering of legends. In the front row, Chuck Norris sat quietly. Unlike the celebrities around him who chatted animatedly, snapped photos, or waved to fans, he remained still. His weathered hands rested loosely on his knees, his posture relaxed but attentive. Though in his 80s now, his eyes remained sharp, missing nothing. He wore no flashy clothing or accessories, just a simple black button-up shirt and jeans. His presence required no announcement. The occasional whispers and pointed fingers from nearby fans said enough. Chuck nodded politely when acknowledged, but kept his focus on the ring. This wasn't his first time in Tokyo, nor his first martial arts exhibition, but it had been years since he'd witnessed the raw energy of live combat. He had come not to be seen, but to observe, to honor the traditions that had shaped his life. For our opening match, Aiko's voice rang out, we have 2 formidable competitors. First, representing the spirit of traditional karate, please welcome Kenji Sato. The crowd applauded respectfully as a lean, muscular man in his 40s entered. Kenji bowed deeply to the audience, then to the officials, his movements precise and dignified. His face showed the marks of a veteran fighter, a small scar above his eye, a nose that had been broken and reset. Yet there was no arrogance in his bearing, only the quiet confidence of a man who had devoted his life to his art. Chuck leaned forward slightly. He recognized Kenji from international competitions years ago, a skilled fighter who had earned respect through discipline and perseverance. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, and Kenji bowed deeply in Chuck's direction. Chuck returned the gesture with a respectful nod. And his opponent, Aiko continued, her voice lifting with theatrical flair, weighing in at an astounding 182 kilograms, over 400 pounds, the sensation of modern sumo, Kenta, the mountain, Hoshida. The arena lights dimmed, except for a single spotlight that followed the entrance of an enormous figure. Where Kenji had walked, Kenta strutted. his massive body adorned with elaborate robes emblazoned with sponsor logos. Instead of the traditional top knot of sumo wrestlers, his hair was styled in a modern fade, dyed with streaks of gold. He wore sunglasses despite the indoor setting and carried a wireless microphone. The crowd's reaction was immediate and divided. Half the arena erupted in wild cheers, while others murmured with disapproval. Traditional sumo was revered in Japan as a disciplined, almost sacred art, but Kenta had transformed it into spectacle, abandoning ritual for showmanship. As he reached the ring, Kenta raised his arms, triggering pyrotechnics that exploded from each corner. He grabbed the microphone and bellowed, "Tokyo! Are you ready to see a mountain crush an ant?" Many in the crowd cheered, while others remained silent. Chuck's expression didn't change, but his focus intensified. Kenta tossed his robe to an attendant, revealing his massive frame. Where traditional sumo wrestlers carried their weight with a certain dignity, Kenta flaunted his size, slapping his belly and flexing for the cameras. He pointed at Kenji and laughed. "This is what you send to fight me? I've had bigger breakfasts." The referee called both fighters to the center. Kenji bowed deeply. Kenta merely nodded, towering over his opponent by nearly a foot and outweighing him by over 200 pounds. Both fighters understand the exhibition rules. Aiko explained to the audience. Victory by submission, knockout, or referee decision. This is not a traditional sumo match but a mixed discipline exhibition. The bell rang, and Kenji immediately adopted a defensive stance, circling cautiously. Kenta, surprisingly agile for his size, stalked forward with heavy steps that seemed to shake the ring itself. "Look at him dance," Kenta taunted loudly enough for the front rows to hear. "Are you here to fight or perform ballet?" Kenji remained focused, ignoring the provocations. He darted in with a quick combination, a jab followed by a roundhouse kick that connected with Kenta's massive thigh. The strikes were technically perfect, but seemed to bounce off the sumo's bulk without effect. Kenta laughed. Was that a mosquito? The crowd tensed as Kenji tried another approach, attempting to use the sumo's weight against him with a sweeping technique. For a moment, it seemed to work. Kenta shifted off balance. But then the massive fighter simply absorbed the momentum and countered with a devastating palm strike. The impact echoed through the arena. Kenji staggered backward, visibly stunned. Before he could recover, Kenta charged forward with surprising speed, his enormous body becoming a battering ram that slammed Kenji against the ropes. "Witness true power!" Kenta shouted as he gripped Kenji in a bear hug that lifted the smaller fighter off his feet. Kenji struggled, his training evident in his technical attempts to break the hold. But Kenta's raw strength was overwhelming. With a roar that silenced the crowd, Kenta lifted Kenji higher and then drove him down to the mat with crushing force. The impact knocked the breath from Kenji's lungs and sent a visible shudder through his body. The referee rushed in, checking Kenji's condition. The veteran fighter tried to rise but collapsed back, clearly disoriented. After a quick medical assessment, the referee waved his hands, calling the match. "Victory to Kenta Hoshida," Aiko announced, her professional tone masking any personal reaction to the brutal display. The arena erupted in mixed response, cheers, boos, and stunned silence blending into a confused roar. Medics rushed to Kenji's side while Kenta paraded around the ring, arms raised in triumph, soaking in the attention like a plant turning toward sunlight. "That's how a mountain fights," he bellowed into the microphone he'd snatched from an attendant. "That's real power. Not technique. Not movies. Not points. Power." As medical staff helped Kenji from the ring, the defeated fighter looked toward Chuck Norris, their eyes meeting briefly. Despite his pain, Kenji managed a small bow of his head. Chuck returned the gesture, his expression showing respect for the fallen warrior. Kenta noticed the exchange. His eyes narrowed as he spotted Chuck in the front row. A new dangerous smile spread across his face. Well, he said, his voice carrying through the arena's speakers. I see we have a Hollywood legend with us tonight. He pointed directly at Chuck. The mighty Chuck Norris himself, the man whose kicks supposedly defy physics, at least according to the internet. A hush fell over the crowd. Cameras swiveled toward Chuck, who remained perfectly still, his expression unchanged. Tell me, old man, Kenta continued, leaning against the ropes nearest Chuck, do you think your movie stunts would work against a real fighter like me? Or do you need special effects to look tough these days? The disrespect was shocking in a culture that revered elders and martial arts masters. Even Kenta's supporters seemed uncertain how to react. Aiko's voice cut in, trying to redirect attention. Our next match will begin shortly. But Kenta wasn't finished. What do you say, Chuck? Want to prove those internet jokes about your toughness? Or are you too busy selling exercise equipment to senior citizens? Chuck's face remained impassive. But something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, but a calm assessment, like a master chess player recognizing a significant move. Around him, the crowd began to murmur, the atmosphere shifting from entertainment to uncomfortable tension. In the commentator's booth, Aiko leaned away from her microphone, whispering to her producer, "This wasn't scheduled. Should we cut his mic?" Her producer shook his head, eyes wide. The ratings would be astronomical. Kenta paced the ring like a predator, feeding off the growing tension. Maybe the legends are just that, legends. Maybe Chuck Norris is just a man after all, a small, old man. The arena held its breath, all eyes moving between the mountainous figure in the ring and the silent legend in the front row. The first act of an unexpected drama was unfolding, and no one, not the organizers, not the crowd, and certainly not Kenta, could predict how it would end. The silence that followed Kenta's taunts lasted only seconds, but it stretched across the arena like an eternity. Chuck Norris hadn't moved, his weathered hands still resting calmly on his knees, his gaze steady. Around him, phones recorded every moment, capturing the tension that radiated from the confrontation. Kenta, gleaming with sweat from his brief but decisive victory, sensed the crowd's anticipation and pressed his advantage. He strutted along the edge of the ring nearest Chuck, his massive body casting a shadow over the front row. "What's wrong, Chuck?" he called out, voice booming through the speakers. "Cat got your tongue? Or just your age catching up with you?" He patted his own massive stomach. "Real strength doesn't need Hollywood magic. Real strength is right here." In the commentary booth, Aiko Tanaka adjusted her headset. Professional training. Battling with personal discomfort. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, voice steady despite the unplanned confrontation, "Kenta Hoshida appears to be directly challenging our honored guest, Chuck Norris." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "For those unfamiliar with Mr. Norris, he is not merely an action film star, but a legitimate martial arts champion who held the professional middleweight karate championship for 6 consecutive years. He is also the founder of Chun-Kook Do and has been inducted into the Black Belt Hall of Fame." Kenta snorted loudly into his microphone. "Championships, from the Stone Age, before most of you were born." He pointed at Chuck again. "Tell me, old man, when was the last time you faced someone who wasn't reading from a script? Someone who could actually hurt you?" The crowd stirred uncomfortably. In Japanese culture, such blatant disrespect toward an elder, especially one as accomplished as Chuck Norris, was shocking. Yet there was also undeniable tension in the moment, a primal curiosity about what would happen next. Slowly, pockets of the audience began to respond. A chant started in one corner of the arena. Chuck! 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 It spread gradually, growing in volume as more voices joined. Others countered with Kenta's name, creating a divide that rippled through the stands like competing waves. The exhibition's organizers huddled at ringside, clearly unprepared for this deviation from the program. "This is unprecedented," Aiko continued, maintaining her composure. "In my 15 years covering martial arts events, I've never seen such a direct public challenge to a guest of honor. For our international viewers, this represents not just a potential physical confrontation but a clash of philosophies. Kenta's brash showmanship against the traditional values of respect and discipline that Mr. Norris has always embodied." Kenta paced impatiently, feeding off the energy. "I'll make it easy for you," he announced, voice cutting through the chants. "One round. Just you and me. Show us if the legend is real or just internet memes and movie magic." He spread his arms wide, addressing the entire arena. "Don't you all want to see it? The great Chuck Norris against Kenta. The Mountain? Hollywood versus reality?" The crowd's response was immediate, a roar that seemed to shake the building itself. Whatever their allegiance, the spectacle of such a match was irresistible. Throughout the commotion, Chuck remained still, his expression unchanging. Decades of discipline had taught him to evaluate situations without revealing his thoughts. His silence wasn't indecision but assessment, measuring not just Kenta's physical threat but the meaning of this moment. Finally, one of the exhibition's organizers approached Chuck, bowing deeply before leaning down to speak privately. The elderly Japanese man seemed apologetic, likely explaining that they could halt the proceedings or remove Kenta if Chuck preferred. The crowd quieted, straining to hear what was being said. Cameras zoomed in on the exchange, though no microphones could capture the words. Chuck nodded once to the organizer, then slowly stood. The simple act silenced the arena instantly. Despite his age, Chuck's movements were fluid and controlled. His posture straight. His presence commanding without effort. He didn't speak or make any grand gestures, he simply looked toward the ring, his gaze meeting Kenta's directly. Kenta's cocky smile faltered momentarily under that steady gaze, but he quickly recovered, raising his microphone. "Look at that! He's actually standing up. Maybe there's some fight left in the old man after all." The chants for Chuck grew louder, drowning out Kenta's supporters. Phones flashed throughout the arena as everyone tried to capture the historic moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Aiko's voice cut through the noise. "It appears Chuck Norris is responding to Kenta's challenge. I must emphasize that Mr. Norris is 79 years old. Age is just a number." Someone shouted from the crowd, triggering a wave of agreement. Chuck slowly removed his black button-up shirt, revealing a simple white t-shirt underneath. His physique, though naturally leaner with age, still showed the definition of someone who had never stopped training. He handed his shirt to a nearby attendant, his movements unhurried and deliberate. Kenta's eyes widened slightly at Chuck's composure, perhaps expecting hesitation or anger. He recovered quickly, playing to the crowd. "Look at that! Grandpa's getting ready. Someone check if he's taken his medication today." The joke fell flat, met with more boos than laughter. The atmosphere had shifted what had begun as entertainment was becoming something more significant. A moment that transcended sport. Chuck walked toward the ring steps with measured strides. Each step he took intensified the crowd's reaction until the arena vibrated with chants of his name. Attendants scrambled to open the ropes for him while officials conferred urgently about rules and liability. "This is absolutely extraordinary," Aiko commented, her professional detachment slipping to reveal genuine awe. "We are potentially witnessing a historic confrontation between two entirely different generations and philosophies of martial arts." As Chuck reached the steps, Kenji Sato, still being treated by medical staff at ringside, struggled to his feet despite his injuries. He bowed deeply to Chuck, a gesture of profound respect from one martial artist to another. Chuck paused, returning the bow with equal respect before continuing his ascent. Kenta watched Chuck's approach, his microphone temporarily forgotten at his side. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. The legend he had mocked was now entering his domain, and the sheer weight of Chuck's calm presence seemed to fill the ring more completely than Kenta's physical mass ever could. "Hold on," Kenta said, finding his voice again. "We need rules. We need a referee. This has to be official." The demand betrayed the first hint of nervousness beneath his bravado. Chuck stepped through the ropes and stood quietly at his corner of the ring. He still hadn't spoken a word, his silence more powerful than any retort could have been. An official approached with forms, speaking rapidly to both men about liability waivers and exhibition rules. Chuck nodded once and signed without hesitation. Kenta, now facing the reality of his challenge, hesitated before scrawling his signature. "It seems this impromptu match will proceed," Eiko announced, her voice tense with excitement. "The exhibition officials are adapting the standard rules: 1 round, victory by submission, knockout, or referee decision." The referee, a veteran of international competitions, entered the ring and called both fighters to the center. Kenta swaggered forward, his initial confidence returning as he towered over Chuck, their size difference stark and dramatic. A visual representation of the odds Chuck faced. "Fighters, you understand the rules?" the referee stated firmly. "I expect a clean match. Bow to each other and return to your corners." Chuck bowed deeply, formally, honoring both his opponent and the tradition of combat. Kenta gave a perfunctory nod, barely inclining his head. As they turned back to their corners, Kenta couldn't resist one final taunt. "Hope your health insurance is paid up, old man. Mountains don't move for legends." Chuck paused and turned slightly. For the first time since the challenge began, he spoke, his voice quiet, yet carrying across the now silent arena. "True strength," he said simply, "needs no announcement." The crowd erupted as Chuck returned to his corner. The simple statement cut through Kenta's bluster like a blade through paper. It wasn't a boast or a threat, it was a philosophy distilled into 5 words. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. In the commentary booth, Eiko gripped her microphone tightly. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are moments away from a confrontation that no one could have predicted. The veteran master against the young giant, wisdom against power, respect against arrogance." The bell rang, sharp and clear, signaling the start of the most unexpected match in the exhibition's history. Kenta immediately assumed his fighting stance, hands raised, feet planted firmly. Chuck stood relaxed, his posture open, hands loose at his sides. For a heartbeat, neither man moved, Kenta waiting for Chuck to engage, Chuck patiently observing. The crowd held its collective breath. Then Kenta, impatient with Chuck's calm, launched his attack. The mountain began to move. The crowd's roar faded to a hushed murmur as Kenta charged forward, each thunderous step shaking the canvas. His massive arms extended like battering rams, aiming to engulf Chuck in a devastating bear hug, the same technique that had crushed Kenji minutes earlier. Chuck didn't retreat. He didn't flinch. Instead, at the precise moment of impact, he simply wasn't there. With a pivot so subtle, it appeared effortless. Chuck redirected his body, mere inches from Kenta's grasp. The sumo's momentum carried him forward into empty space, his massive frame momentarily unbalanced. Before Kenta could recover, Chuck delivered a precise strike to the back of the larger man's knee, not a devastating blow, but a technical reminder that positioning mattered more than mass. Kenta stumbled, but quickly regained his footing, spinning around with surprising agility. His face darkened. The cocky smile, replaced by focused intensity, he hadn't expected to miss. "Slippery old man," he muttered, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "That won't save you." Chuck resumed his relaxed stance, expression unchanged. He made no retort, offered no taunts. His breathing remained steady, his eyes alert but calm, a stark contrast to Kenta's increasingly heavy respiration. Aiko's voice cut through the tension. "What we're witnessing is fascinating. Chuck Norris is employing classical defensive technique, economy of movement, precise footwork. He's not trying to match Kenta's power, but to neutralize it." Kenta circled more cautiously now, feinting with jabs that Chuck didn't bother to block. He simply wasn't where the punches landed. The crowd began to murmur, then to cheer each time Chuck evaded. It wasn't just defense, it was mastery. "Stop dancing and fight," Kenta finally shouted, frustration breaking through his composure. He launched another attack, this time a sweeping strike that would have connected with Chuck's head had the older fighter not ducked smoothly beneath it, simultaneously, delivering two rapid strikes to Kenta's exposed ribs. The impacts weren't visually dramatic, but Kenta's pained grimace told the true story. Those seemingly light touches had found pressure points that sent sharp pain through his massive frame. He backed away, reassessing the situation. In the front row, Kenji Sato watched with growing amazement despite his own injuries. He leaned toward a fellow martial artist. "He's using Kenta's aggression against him," he whispered. "Every move Kenta makes creates an opening that Chuck exploits." The dance continued for another minute. Kenta attacking with increasing frustration, Chuck responding with minimal movement and maximum efficiency. It wasn't flashy like the movies. There were no spinning kicks or dramatic throws. Instead, it was a masterclass in timing and precision. Kenta, breathing heavily now, paused to wipe sweat from his brow. "Is this all you've got?" he challenged between breaths. "Little taps and running away?" The Chuck Norris I heard about would have ended this already. For the first time, Chuck smiled slightly. Not in mockery, but in genuine amusement. He gestured for Kenta to continue, the simple movement somehow conveying that the lesson wasn't yet complete. Infuriated by Chuck's calm, Kenta abandoned technique altogether. With a roar that silenced the crowd, he charged forward like a freight train, arms wide, intending to simply overwhelm Chuck with his mass. What happened next occurred so quickly that many in the audience would later debate exactly what they'd seen. As Kenta bore down on him, Chuck stepped not away but toward the charge. He turned his body sideways, creating the smallest possible target, while simultaneously delivering a precise strike to Kenta's solar plexus. The impact was like a switch being flipped. Kenta's charge halted abruptly, his momentum arrested by that single, perfectly placed blow. His eyes widened in shock as the air rushed from his lungs. For a moment, the massive fighter stood frozen, arms still outstretched but suddenly powerless. Chuck stepped back, hands returning to a relaxed position. He waited, giving Kenta time to recover, not out of necessity, but respect. Kenta gasped for breath, his face flushed with a combination of pain and humiliation. The crowd, sensing a turning point, grew louder, the chants for Chuck now dominating the arena. "Incredible technique," Aiko commented, professional composure barely containing her excitement. Chuck Norris just demonstrated what martial arts masters have taught for centuries, that precise application of force matters more than quantity. That single strike targeted a vulnerable point that exists regardless of size or strength. Kenta straightened, his expression darkening from embarrassment to genuine anger. The exhibition match was becoming something more personal, a challenge to everything he believed about himself and his invincibility. "Enough games," he growled, loud enough for Chuck to hear. "Let's see how your pressure points work when you're on the ground." He advanced more methodically now, cutting off the ring, trying to trap Chuck in a corner. The strategy was sound: limit the older fighter's mobility. Use the ropes to prevent his evasive movements. Then bring overwhelming force to bear. Chuck recognized the tactic immediately, but allowed himself to be guided toward the corner. The crowd tensed, some calling out warnings that Chuck didn't need. As his back neared the ropes, Kenta's confidence visibly returned. "Nowhere to run now, legend," Kenta said, closing in for what he believed would be the decisive moment. Chuck waited until the last possible second, until Kenta had committed fully to his attack, before executing a move so fluid it appeared choreographed. Instead of retreating against the ropes, he stepped forward and to the side, using Kenta's forward momentum to guide the larger man past him. As Kenta stumbled toward the ropes, Chuck delivered a precise strike to the back of his neck, not with a closed fist, but with an open hand, the fingers positioned to impact specific nerve clusters. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Kenta's legs buckled, and he collapsed to one knee, his massive body suddenly unresponsive to his commands. It wasn't pain that dropped him, but a temporary disruption of his nervous system, a technique rarely seen outside advanced martial arts circles. The crowd erupted in astonishment. Chuck stepped back, allowing Kenta space and time to recover. His expression neither triumphant nor mocking, simply focused. In the commentary booth, Eiko struggled to maintain her professional demeanor. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've just witnessed a demonstration of Kyusho Jitsu, the targeting of pressure points to temporarily disable an opponent. This is not about causing injury, but controlling the fight through superior knowledge of the human body." Kenta shook his head, trying to clear the strange numbness that had invaded his limbs. He rose unsteadily to his feet, his earlier arrogance replaced by something new. A dawning realization that he was facing not just another fighter, but decades of wisdom, condensed into physical form. "How?" he began, but couldn't finish the question. Chuck, sensing the shift in his opponent, spoke quietly. "Size is not strength. Youth is not wisdom. True power comes from knowledge applied with precision." The words carried across the silent arena. They weren't meant to humiliate, but to teach a master sharing insights with a student who had finally become ready to listen. For a moment, conflict visibly warred across Kenta's face, pride battling with recognition of truth. Then, his expression hardened once more. He shook his arms, forcing sensation back into his muscles. "Pretty words," he said, voice rougher than before. "But this isn't philosophy class." He raised his hands again, resuming his fighting stance. But something had changed. There was less swagger in his posture, more genuine focus in his eyes. Kenta was truly fighting now, not performing. Chuck nodded slightly, acknowledging the shift. He resumed his own stance. Still economical. Still calm. The battle had entered a new phase. Less about ego, more about the pure art of combat. The crowd sensed the change, their chants giving way to attentive silence. They were no longer merely spectators to entertainment, but witnesses to something authentic. A clash, not just of bodies, but of approaches to martial arts itself. Kenta advanced again, but his movements had changed. He was more measured, more thoughtful, probing for weaknesses rather than simply overwhelming with mass. Chuck responded in kind, their exchanges becoming a dialogue of technique, strike, and counter, advance and retreat, each movement containing meaning beyond the physical. For 2 full minutes, they engaged in this dance of combat. Chuck gave ground when necessary, advanced when appropriate. his every movement demonstrating a lifetime of training distilled into instinct. Kenta, learning even as he fought, adapted his style, using his size more strategically, with greater awareness of balance and timing. Those in the audience with martial arts experience watched in growing appreciation. This was no longer spectacle but art, the true essence of combat as a path to understanding. Then, in a moment that would later be analyzed in dojos across the world, Kenta saw what he believed was an opening. Chuck had stepped back after deflecting a strike, his right side momentarily exposed. Kenta launched a powerful roundhouse kick aimed at that vulnerability, a technique surprising from such a large fighter, demonstrating his true athletic ability beneath the showmanship. Chuck could have evaded completely. Instead, he chose to meet the technique directly, not with greater force, but with perfect timing. As Kenta's leg reached its target, Chuck's forearm rose to block, the point of contact precisely where the force could be absorbed rather than resisted. The impact echoed through the arena, the sound of technique, of youth meeting experience. For a suspended moment, they remained connected by that single point of contact, a physical representation of their philosophical clash. Then Chuck executed a counter that no one, least of all Kenta, anticipated. Rather than retreating from the kick, he stepped into it, using Kenta's extended leg as a momentary anchor. With a subtle shift of weight and a precise application of pressure, he unbalanced the larger fighter while simultaneously sweeping Kenta's supporting leg. Physics took over where technique began. Kenta's massive body, suddenly bereft of its foundation, toppled backward. He hit the canvas with an impact that seemed to shake the entire arena, the fall more shocking for how effortlessly it had been achieved. The crowd exploded in astonishment and admiration. Chuck stepped back, hands returning to his sides, making no move to press his advantage. The referee rushed in, checking Kenta's condition, but the fallen giant was already struggling to rise. His face, a mask of disbelief. "Stay down," the referee advised, but Kenta pushed him aside. "I'm not finished," he growled, using the ropes to pull himself upright. His breathing was labored, his movements less fluid, but his determination remained unbroken. Chuck watched quietly, neither advancing nor retreating. He stood in the center of the ring, the eye of the hurricane, calm amidst chaos. As Kenta finally regained his feet, their eyes met across the canvas. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition that transcended words. Beneath the spectacle and showmanship, beyond the clash of styles and generations, they shared a fundamental truth. The pursuit of mastery was a journey without end. Kenta straightened his shoulders and, for the first time that night, bowed to Chuck not deeply, not submissively, but with genuine acknowledgement. Then he raised his hands once more, ready to continue. The lesson wasn't over. The next phase of their unexpected encounter was about to begin. The arena held its breath as Kenta and Chuck faced each other anew. The atmosphere had transformed. What began as spectacle had become something closer to ceremony, a demonstration of martial arts in its purest form. Even those in the audience with no fighting experience sensed they were witnessing something rare and valuable. Kenta's stance had changed. Gone was the showboating, the exaggerated movements designed to entertain. His massive body now moved with more economy, his focus evident in the intensity of his gaze. The fall had not broken his spirit, it had awakened it. Chuck recognized the shift immediately. His own posture adjusted subtly, acknowledging that his opponent was now truly present in the moment, fighting with sincerity rather than ego. "Ladies and gentlemen," Aiko's voice carried softly through the speakers, respectful of the concentrated silence that had fallen over the arena. "What we're seeing is extraordinary. This has transcended simple competition. We are witnessing a dialogue of martial philosophy expressed through physical form. Kenta circled more deliberately now. His footwork surprisingly nimble for a man of his size. He no longer rushed in blindly but tested Chuck's defenses with measured jabs and feints. Chuck responded in kind, their exchanges becoming more technical, more precise, a conversation of combat rather than a clash of wills. From the sidelines, Kenji Sato watched with growing admiration. Despite his earlier defeat at Kenta's hands, he found himself appreciating the sumo's transformation. "He's finally fighting with respect," he murmured to a nearby official. Now he might actually learn something. The change was evident to everyone. Kenta still utilized his enormous strength and mass, but now he applied it with greater awareness. When he struck, it was with purpose rather than rage. When he advanced, it was with strategy rather than intimidation. Chuck matched this evolution with his own adjustments. Where before he had been primarily defensive, now he began to demonstrate more of his offensive capabilities. His strikes, though still economical, carried greater intent. His movements, always efficient, now revealed more of the technical mastery that had made him a champion long before he became a film star. At one point, Kenta managed to trap Chuck against the ropes, using his size to cut off escape routes. Instead of trying to evade, Chuck stepped into the danger, delivering a lightning-fast combination to Kenta's midsection, 3 precise strikes that found vulnerable points between the massive muscles. Kenta grunted in pain but didn't retreat. He countered with a sweeping arm strike that Chuck ducked beneath, the massive limb passing inches above his head. The exchange continued, each fighter adapting to the other's rhythm, finding and exploiting openings, then adjusting to prevent those same vulnerabilities from being targeted again. "This is no longer about winning or losing," Aiko commented softly. "This is about the exchange of knowledge through action, what the ancient masters called mutual cultivation through combat." The crowd watched in reverent silence. Phones lowered, attention absolute. Even those who had come expecting entertainment now sensed they were privileged witnesses to something approaching art. 5 minutes into the match, far longer than anyone had expected it to last, both fighters showed signs of exertion. Kenta's breathing was heavy, sweat pouring down his massive frame. Chuck's movements, while still fluid, had slowed slightly. The inevitable concession to age that even lifetime training couldn't completely overcome. Yet neither man showed any intention of stopping. There was something unfinished between them, not a score to settle, but a lesson to complete. Kenta, seeing Chuck's subtle fatigue, pressed forward with renewed determination. He launched a flurry of strikes designed to overwhelm through sheer volume, each blow powerful enough to end the fight if it landed cleanly. Chuck weathered the storm with extraordinary defensive technique, his hands and forearms moving in precise patterns to deflect rather than block, to redirect rather than absorb. Even so, a glancing blow caught his shoulder, momentarily throwing him off balance. Kenta seized the opportunity, closing the distance with surprising speed. His massive arms wrapped around Chuck in a bear hug that lifted the older fighter off his feet, squeezing with enough force to potentially end the match. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Many rose to their feet, certain they were about to witness the legend's defeat. But Chuck's expression never changed. Even as Kenta's enormous arms constricted around him, cutting off his breath, his eyes remained calm, focused. His body, instead of struggling against the immovable force, went momentarily limp, a counterintuitive technique that confused Kenta just long enough for Chuck to find the leverage he needed. With a movement so subtle many missed it, Chuck shifted his center of gravity and executed a precise counter technique. His hands found specific pressure points along Kenta's massive arms, applying focused force not to the muscles themselves, which would have been futile against such mass, but to the nerve pathways that controlled them. The effect was immediate. Kenta's grip involuntarily loosened, just enough for Chuck to slip downward. As his feet touched the canvas, he maintained contact with Kenta's body, using the larger man's frame as leverage. With a technique that seemed to defy physics, Chuck redirected Kenta's enormous momentum, guiding rather than forcing the mountain to move. Kenta stumbled forward, his balance compromised by the unexpected shift. Before he could recover, Chuck delivered 3 rapid strikes to specific points along his spine, not damaging blows, but precisely calibrated touches that interrupted the neural pathways controlling Kenta's lower body. The massive fighter's legs buckled beneath him. He dropped to one knee, momentarily paralyzed, not by pain, but by the temporary neural disruption. His face registered shock rather than suffering the astonishment of experiencing something beyond his physical understanding. The crowd erupted in amazement. Phones rose again, capturing the moment when size and youth had been overcome by knowledge and precision. "Remarkable!" Aiko exclaimed. Professional reserve momentarily abandoned. What we've just witnessed is Kyushojitsu at its highest level, the targeting of neurological weak points that exist in every human body regardless of size or conditioning. As Kenta struggled to regain control of his limbs, Chuck stepped back, giving his opponent space and time to recover. There was no gloating in his posture, no celebration of the momentary advantage, only patient observation. The mark of a true teacher. Gradually, sensation returned to Kenta's legs. He rose unsteadily. His expression transformed. The arrogance had vanished entirely, replaced by something approaching wonder. For perhaps the first time in his fighting career, he had encountered something his size and strength couldn't overcome, a humbling and enlightening experience. "What was that?" he asked, his voice quieter than it had been all evening. Chuck's response was equally quiet but carried clearly in the hushed arena. "Knowledge of the body. Every strength has its counterpoint. Every mass has its leverage." Kenta nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson. Then, with visible determination, he resumed his fighting stance, but differently now. His posture was more controlled, his weight distribution more conscious. He was no longer just fighting, he was learning. Chuck acknowledged this shift with a slight nod before resuming his own stance. The dynamic between them had fundamentally changed. What had begun as a challenge had become an exchange. What had started as confrontation had evolved into education. Their next engagement demonstrated this transformation. Kenta attacked with more precision, his enormous strikes now targeted rather than sweeping. Chuck responded with increased offensive technique, no longer simply evading but actively engaging, showing Kenta both the effectiveness and limitations of different approaches. For 3 intense minutes, they exchanged techniques that ranged across multiple martial disciplines. Kenta's sumo base, incorporating elements of karate and judo, he had clearly studied, but rarely needed to use. Chuck demonstrating the fluid integration of karate, taekwondo, judo, and Brazilian jiu-jitsu that had formed the foundation of his Chun-Kuk-Do system. The crowd watched in growing appreciation. Those with martial arts experience recognized the evolution happening before their eyes. Kenta adapting his approach with each exchange. Chuck subtly guiding that adaptation through action rather than instruction. "We are witnessing something extraordinary," Aiko commented, her voice hushed with respect. "What began as spectacle has become masterclass. This is no longer about victory, but about the transmission of knowledge through experience, the oldest and most profound form of martial arts instruction." The exchange continued, growing more technical, more nuanced. Kenta, learning with remarkable speed, began to incorporate some of Chuck's economy of movement into his own style, using his mass more efficiently. Chuck, in turn, demonstrated how Kenta's natural attributes could be better utilized through proper technique. At one point, Kenta executed a throw that momentarily caught Chuck off guard, sending the older fighter to the canvas. The crowd gasped, but Chuck rolled smoothly back to his feet, nodding with genuine approval at the well-executed technique. "Good," he said, simply the first direct praise he had offered. Kenta's face showed momentary surprise, then a flash of something deeper pride, not in dominance but in accomplishment. In learning rather than winning. He bowed slightly, acknowledging both the praise and its source. As they resumed, their exchange became less a fight and more a conversation technique, answering technique, question meeting response, knowledge flowing in both directions. Even Chuck, with his decades of experience, found moments of insight in Kenta's innovative applications of traditional sumo principles. 12 minutes into what had been expected to be a brief exhibition match, both fighters showed significant fatigue. Kenta's massive body gleamed with sweat, his movements slower, but more deliberate. Chuck's breathing had become more measured, his techniques more economical, adapting to the reality of age, while sacrificing nothing of effectiveness. The referee approached, clearly concerned about the duration and intensity of the unexpected match. "Gentlemen," he began, "perhaps we should—" "Not yet," Kenta interrupted, his tone respectful but firm. He looked directly at Chuck. "There's something unfinished here." Chuck nodded once in agreement. The referee, recognizing something important was transpiring beyond his understanding, stepped back with a bow. The crowd sensed the approaching culmination. Phones were raised again, recording what many already knew would be a historic moment in martial arts, not for its spectacle but for its substance. Kenta and Chuck circled each other one final time, their movements measured, their focus absolute. Then, in silent agreement, they engaged for what both knew would be the concluding exchange. Kenta launched forward with everything he had learned, his natural power now channeled through improved technique, his size employed with greater awareness of balance and leverage. It was his most effective attack of the match, combining raw strength with newfound precision. Chuck met the advance, not with evasion, but with direct engagement. For 10 breathtaking seconds, they exchanged a flurry of techniques that demonstrated the full spectrum of their abilities. Kenta's adaptability, Chuck's mastery, youth's vigor, age's wisdom, power's impact, technique's efficiency. Then came the decisive moment. Kenta, seeing what he believed was an opening, committed fully to a powerful strike aimed at Chuck's midsection. It was well conceived, well executed, but it was also anticipated. Chuck didn't avoid the attack. Instead, he stepped into it, accepting the partial impact while simultaneously executing a lightning-fast sequence of strikes to specific points along Kenta's torso and neck. Each touch was precisely calibrated, targeting not organs or muscles but the neural pathways that connected them. The effect was comprehensive and immediate. Kenta's massive body seemed to short-circuit, his limbs momentarily beyond his control. His forward momentum carried him past Chuck, and he collapsed to the canvas, not unconscious, not injured, but temporarily disconnected from his own physical commands. The arena fell silent, the crowd frozen in collective awe. Chuck stood calmly, his breathing returning to normal, his posture relaxed. He waited, watching Kenta with genuine concern rather than triumph. After several seconds, control began returning to Kenta's limbs. He rolled onto his back, looking up at the arena lights, then at Chuck. His expression wasn't angry or humiliated, it was enlightened, as though seeing something clearly for the first time. Chuck approached and extended his hand. Kenta took it, allowing the smaller, older man to help him to his feet, a visual that captured the essence of what had transpired between them. As Kenta stood, steadying himself, he bowed deeply to Chuck. Not the perfunctory nod he had given earlier, but a genuine gesture of profound respect. Chuck returned the bow with equal depth, honoring not just Kenta's physical power, but the journey they had shared. The crowd, sensing the significance of the moment, rose to their feet in a standing ovation that shook the arena. It wasn't the rowdy celebration that had followed Kenta's earlier victory, but something more reverent appreciation for witnessing something authentic and meaningful. Kenta turned to the audience, raising Chuck's hand in his own massive grip, acknowledging not defeat but enlightenment. The cheers intensified, washing over the ring in waves of genuine admiration. In the commentary booth, Eiko struggled to maintain professional composure, her voice thick with emotion. Ladies and gentlemen, what we've witnessed tonight transcends sport or entertainment. This was martial arts in its truest form, not just combat but communication. Not just technique but philosophy expressed through physical form. As the applause continued, Kenta leaned toward Chuck, speaking quietly so only he could hear. "I understand now," he said simply. Chuck nodded, his eyes reflecting both acknowledgement of Kenta's realization and recognition of the beginning of a longer journey. "Understanding is just the first step," he replied. "The path never ends." Together, they walked toward the ropes, their unlikely encounter concluded, but its impact just beginning to ripple outward through the arena, through the martial arts community, and through their own continuing journeys as fighters and, more importantly, as students of an ancient and evolving art. The noise of the crowd seemed distant to Kenta as he and Chuck reached the edge of the ring. His massive body felt strange to him, familiar, yet somehow altered, as if the neural pathways Chuck had temporarily disrupted had reconnected in slightly different configurations. But the greater change was internal, a shift in perception that made the cheers and camera flashes seem suddenly hollow. As Chuck prepared to exit the ring, Kenta impulsively placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture that would have seemed impossible an hour earlier. "Wait," he said, his voice stripped of its usual theatrical projection. "I need to say something." Chuck paused, turning back with quiet attention. Around them, the crowd's volume diminished as they sensed another unexpected moment unfolding. Kenta hesitated, unused to vulnerability, especially in front of thousands. He glanced around the arena at the fans who had cheered his arrogance, at the cameras that had amplified his persona, at the promotional banners bearing his image with slogans like, "The mountain cannot be moved." Then he looked back at Chuck, whose patient silence offered neither judgment nor pressure, only space for authentic expression. Kenta took a deep breath and turned to the nearest official. "I need the microphone," he said quietly. The request passed quickly through the staff, and moments later, a wireless microphone was handed up to him. The arena fell into expectant silence as Kenta raised it to his lips. "Tonight," he began, his voice different from the booming performance that had opened the event, "I came here to show my strength, to prove something." He paused, searching for words that had never been part of his public vocabulary. "I thought strength was about size, about domination, about making others feel small so I could feel big." The crowd's silence deepened, cameras focusing on his unusually subdued expression. "What I learned tonight, what Chuck Norris showed me, is that true strength has nothing to do with any of that." Kenta looked directly at Chuck as he continued. "True strength is about control, not just of your opponent, but of yourself. It's about knowledge, not just power. It's about respect, not intimidation." From the commentary booth, Eiko watched with astonishment, her microphone temporarily muted as she whispered to her producer, "Are we seeing what I think we're seeing? Is this the same Kenta who mocked Kenji Sato's unconscious body less than an hour ago?" Kenta turned toward where Kenji sat at ringside, still being attended by medical staff. "Kenji Sato," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the speakers. "I owe you an apology. My behavior after our match was shameful. You fought with honor, and I disrespected that. I am sorry." A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. Kenji, visibly stunned, managed a small bow of acknowledgement from his seat. Kenta then addressed the wider audience. "To everyone who came expecting me to be the same showman I've always been, I apologize for the disappointment. But I would rather disappoint you authentically than entertain you falsely." He turned back to Chuck, who had remained quietly present throughout this unexpected speech, and to Chuck Norris. Kenta's voice faltered slightly, emotion breaking through his composed exterior. "Thank you for the most valuable lesson of my career. Not just about fighting, but about being." With that, Kenta bowed deeply, holding the position longer than protocol required, a physical expression of the transformation occurring within him. When he straightened, he handed the microphone to an official and turned back to Chuck, who nodded once in acknowledgement of both the words and their weight. Together, they exited the ring, descending the steps side by side, the massive Sumo and the aging legend, physically mismatched yet now connected by something transcending their differences. As they reached the floor, they were immediately surrounded. Officials, photographers, reporters, and fans pressed forward, all demanding attention, explanations, interviews, autographs. The noise rose again, threatening to sweep away the moment of authenticity with the usual circus of celebrity. Chuck, sensing Kenta's overwhelm, stepped slightly in front of him, not protectively but supportively, creating a small pocket of calm in the chaos. He leaned closer to speak privately. "This is the harder fight," he said quietly. "Being true to what you've learned while the world expects what you've always been." Kenta nodded, grateful for the understanding. "How do you handle it?" he asked. "One moment at a time," Chuck replied. "And by remembering that other people's expectations aren't your responsibility." Before they could continue, Aiko approached with a camera crew, her professional smile indicating she was back on air. "Mr. Norris, Kenta, the audience is buzzing about what we've just witnessed. Would you share your thoughts on this extraordinary match?" Chuck looked to Kenta, offering him the first response, another small gesture of respect that didn't go unnoticed. Kenta paused, visibly resisting the urge to slip back into his familiar bombastic character. "It wasn't a match," he said finally. "It was an education." Aiko turned to Chuck, clearly hoping for more detailed commentary. "And you, Mr. Norris? Many are calling this a masterclass in martial arts philosophy as much as technique. Was that your intention when you accepted Kenta's challenge?" Chuck smiled slightly. "I found that the best teaching happens when you don't announce your teaching. Actions communicate what words often can't." As the interview continued, the crowd's attention began to disperse. The exhibition's organizers were already announcing the next scheduled match, trying to redirect focus back to the planned program. Yet many in the audience remained fixed on the unexpected story that had unfolded before them, the transformation not just of a fight but of a fighter. Near the tunnel entrance, several of Kenta's entourage waited, assistants, trainers, and promoters whose livelihoods depended on the character he had just publicly begun to shed. Their expressions ranged from confusion to concern, some already on phones likely discussing damage control for their brand. Kenta noticed them and hesitated, suddenly aware of the practical implications of his spiritual awakening. Chuck, following his gaze, understood immediately. "Change isn't a single moment," he said quietly. "It's a path. Sometimes you walk it alone, sometimes with others. The key is to keep walking." Kenta nodded, absorbing the wisdom. Then, with newfound resolve, he straightened his massive shoulders and walked toward his team, not as the character they had helped create, but as the man he was beginning to discover. Chuck watched him go, recognizing both the challenge and the opportunity that lay ahead for the younger fighter. Then he turned toward his own obligations, the fans who waited respectfully at a distance, the officials who needed his signature on paperwork, the friends who had accompanied him to the event and now watched with quiet pride. As he moved through the arena, Chuck passed by the warm-up area, where fighters for the next match prepared. They stopped their preparations to bow deeply as he passed, some requesting quick photos or brief words of advice. Chuck accommodated each with genuine attention, treating novices with the same respect he offered masters. Meanwhile, across the arena, Kenta faced the immediate aftermath of his transformation. His promoter, a slick-haired man in an expensive suit, gesticulated wildly, clearly distressed by the potential commercial implications of his star's unexpected authenticity. "What the hell was that?" the promoter demanded, keeping his voice low but intense. "We've spent years building this persona. The mountain. The unstoppable force. And you just had some spiritual awakening in the middle of our biggest event?" Kenta listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful rather than defensive. When the promoter finally paused for breath, Kenta placed one massive hand gently on the smaller man's shoulder. "I understand your concern," he said with unexpected calmness. "But I can't go back to being someone I now know isn't real. It's entertainment." The promoter insisted. "It's business. No one wants to see a humble sumo wrestler. They want the monster, the villain, the mountain that crushes everything in its path." Kenta considered this, then replied with simple certainty, "Then perhaps it's time for them to want something different. And if they don't," he shrugged his enormous shoulders, "then perhaps it's time for me to find a different path." The promoter stared at him, mouth agape, seemingly unable to process this deviation from the carefully constructed narrative that had made them both wealthy. Before he could formulate a response, they were interrupted by an unexpected arrival. Kenji Sato, still moving gingerly from his injuries, approached with quiet dignity. He bowed to Kenta, not the perfunctory acknowledgement of a defeated opponent, but the genuine respect of one martial artist for another. "Your words meant a great deal," Kenji said simply. "Few have the courage to change so publicly." Kenta returned the bow, deeper than protocol required. "I owe you more than words," he replied. "Perhaps, when you've recovered, you might consider training together. I have much to learn about traditional technique." The promoter threw up his hands in exasperation and walked away, already on his phone, likely calling emergency meetings with sponsors. Kenta watched him go with a mixture of sympathy and resolve, understanding the disruption he had caused while remaining committed to his new path. Across the arena, Chuck was preparing to leave, having fulfilled his obligations to fans and officials. As he neared the exit, he found Aiko waiting, her camera crew dismissed, her professional persona momentarily set aside. "Mr. Norris," she said, bowing respectfully, "may I speak with you privately for a moment?" Chuck nodded, stepping aside with her into a quieter corner. "What we witnessed tonight," Aiko began, her voice soft with genuine emotion, "goes beyond sports reporting. I've covered martial arts for 15 years, and I've never seen transformation happen so visibly, so completely." She hesitated, then asked, "Was it intentional? Did you know this would happen when you accepted his challenge?" Chuck considered the question carefully. "I knew there was potential," he answered honestly. "Beneath Kenta's persona, I sensed a true martial artist who had lost his way. Sometimes the right opponent isn't the one who defeats you, but the one who shows you who you could be." Aiko nodded thoughtfully. "My father was a traditional karate instructor," she shared. He always said that martial arts weren't about fighting others but about conquering yourself. I never fully understood that until tonight. Your father sounds like a wise man, Chuck replied with a smile. And he raised a daughter who recognizes wisdom when she sees it. That's no small achievement. As they concluded their conversation, Chuck noticed Kenta approaching across the now emptying arena floor. The massive fighter moved differently, his swagger replaced by more measured steps, his posture less about intimidation and more about presence. When he reached them, Kenta bowed to Chuck once more. I wanted to thank you again, he said, and to ask you something important. Chuck waited attentively. The path you mentioned, Kenta continued, a vulnerable uncertainty in his voice that would have been unimaginable hours earlier. The one that never ends. I want to walk it correctly. Would you? Would you consider offering guidance? Not as a full-time teacher, but perhaps correspondence, occasional meetings, when your schedule permits? The request, humble, sincere, and unexpected, hung in the air between them. Chuck studied Kenta's face, seeing beyond the physical transformation to the deeper shift occurring within. The best guidance I can offer, Chuck replied finally, is to remind you that the path is already beneath your feet. You've taken the first step, recognizing that strength without character is just force, and technique without respect is just movement. He reached into his pocket and retrieved a small notebook, wrote something briefly, and tore out the page. But yes, he continued, handing the paper to Kenta, I'm happy to offer what wisdom I can. This is my personal email. Write to me anytime. Kenta accepted the paper with both hands, bowing deeply in gratitude. The contrast between this moment and their first interaction could not have been more profound. The arrogant showman transformed into an earnest student. The mountain reshaped not by external force, but by internal recognition. As they parted ways, Chuck toward the exit, Kenta back toward his team, and Aiko to her final broadcasting duties. The arena around them continued to empty. The next match had begun, but many fans were already leaving, discussing the unexpected drama they had witnessed rather than the scheduled entertainment that followed. Outside, in the cool Tokyo evening, camera crews waited for statements, social media already buzzing with clips and commentary about what was being called the lesson, a moment when martial arts had reclaimed its soul from the spectacle that had nearly consumed it. Chuck walked quietly toward his waiting car, declining further interviews with polite nods. As he settled into the back seat, he glanced once more at the arena's illuminated facade, a temple of entertainment that had, for one unexpected evening, become a dojo, in the truest sense of the word, a place of awakening. The car pulled away, carrying the aging legend back to his hotel. But behind him, within the arena and beyond, the ripples of what had transpired continued to spread, touching Kenta, Kenji, Aiko, the crowd, and soon, through the viral nature of modern media, martial artists around the world. It had begun with a challenge born of arrogance. It had ended with a lesson rooted in respect. And between those points, something profound and timeless had been transmitted, not through words but through action, not through dominance but through wisdom. The mountain had not been conquered. It had been transformed. 3 months after the Tokyo exhibition, Kenta Hoshida knelt on worn tatami mats in a traditional dojo outside Kyoto. The space was nothing like the arenas he had dominated. No cameras, no sponsors' banners, no crowds. Just polished floors, simple walls, and the scent of incense mingling with sweat. Across from him knelt Kenji Sato, now recovered from his injuries, his lean frame relaxed in meditation posture. Between them sat an elderly sensei, his weathered face serene despite the incongruity of the massive former celebrity among his students. Breath is the foundation, the master instructed. Before technique, before strength, before strategy, there must be proper breath. Kenta closed his eyes, focusing on the rhythm of inhalation and exhalation. His body had changed over the past months. He remained enormous, but the quality of his mass had shifted, less focused on intimidation, more on functional strength and flexibility. The transformation within had been even more profound. The aftermath of his encounter with Chuck Norris had unfolded in complex ways. As expected, his promoters had panicked. Sponsors called emergency meetings. His carefully constructed brand as the Mountain, the unstoppable, trash-talking force of nature, had been built on a persona he could no longer embody. Some business relationships ended. His social media following initially dropped. Entertainment offers dried up. The machine that had made him wealthy sputtered when its central character stepped out of the role. Yet other doors opened. Traditional dojos that had once viewed him as a disgrace now welcomed him as a student. Veteran fighters who had avoided him reached out with guidance. A different audience emerged, interested not in spectacle but in his journey. Most surprisingly, some original fans stayed, their messages shifting from "crush him" to "I'm learning from your change." The meditation ended with a soft bell. Kenta opened his eyes, bringing his attention back to the dojo. The other students rose and bowed to the sensei before dispersing. Kenta and Kenji remained kneeling. "Your progress is noteworthy," the old master told Kenta. "You bring the dedication of a professional athlete, which serves you well. But you still carry tension in your shoulders, the weight of who you are still pressing down on who you are becoming." Kenta bowed in acknowledgement. "Yes, sensei. The path is not always straight. If it were straight, we would reach the end too quickly. Be grateful for the curves that extend the journey." As they rose, Kenji placed a hand on Kenta's massive arm. What had begun as an unlikely reconciliation had evolved into friendship, the veteran fighter guiding the reformed showman through traditions absent from his professional training. "Letter from America?" Kenji asked quietly. Kenta nodded. "Yesterday. I'll show you after practice." For 2 hours, they trained alongside other students, Kenta's enormous frame moving with increasing fluidity through forms, emphasizing precision over power. Occasionally, younger students glanced his way, still somewhat awed by the former celebrity. But the novelty had mostly faded, as Kenta proved his sincere commitment. After training, walking through peaceful Kyoto streets toward a small tea house, Kenta showed Kenji the latest email from Chuck. "Kenta, your progress continues to impress me. The video you shared of your kata shows remarkable improvement in your center of gravity control. Remember that power flows from stability, and stability comes from proper root. Your size will always be an advantage, but only when it works with technique rather than replacing it. Your question about handling public perception is one I've faced throughout my career, though in different ways. People will always try to place you in the box they've created for you. Your challenge isn't to break out of their box, but to realize you were never in it to begin with. Their perceptions are clouds passing across the sky. The sky itself remains unchanged. I'm pleased to hear about your upcoming demonstration. Teaching what you're learning, even while still a student yourself, reinforces your own understanding. As my old instructor used to say, to truly know something, teach it. Continue walking your path with sincerity. That authenticity will attract the right people and opportunities, even if they're different from those of your past. With respect, Chuck. He remains a profound teacher, Kenji said, returning the phone. And a kind one. To maintain such regular guidance, Kenta nodded. I've realized his greatest skill isn't physical technique, but seeing potential in others even when they don't see it themselves. They reached the tea house and settled at their corner table. Through the window, cherry blossoms floated on the spring breeze, a scene far removed from the neon and noise of Kenta's former world. Have you decided about the offer? Kenji asked after they had eaten in comfortable silence. Kenta sighed. 3 weeks earlier, he had received a proposal from a major martial arts organization not to return as a competitor, but to serve as a goodwill ambassador, teaching seminars about traditional values to young fighters, increasingly drawn to showmanship and trash-talking. I'm still considering, he replied. There's irony in me teaching others about humility and respect, given my past. Who better? Kenji challenged. Those who were born humble cannot teach the path from arrogance to respect. They have never walked it. Their conversation was interrupted by a young boy approaching their table, clutching a notebook and pen. He couldn't have been more than 10, his small frame vibrating with nervous energy. Excuse me, he said, bowing deeply. Are you Kenta Hoshida? Kenta tensed slightly. These encounters still carried uncertainty. Was this a fan of his old persona, disappointed by his transformation? I am, he acknowledged with a nod. The boy thrust forward his notebook. Could I have your autograph, please? I saw your demonstration at the children's hospital last month. The way you showed us how to stand strong without being mean, it was amazing. Kenta's expression softened with surprise. 2 months earlier, he had volunteered at a local children's hospital, teaching simple defensive techniques to young patients, an experience that had received no publicity. Of course, he said, accepting the notebook. What's your name? Hiroki, the boy replied eagerly. I've been practicing the breathing technique you taught us every day. My doctor says my lung capacity is improving. As Kenta signed, adding a personal note of encouragement, Kenji watched with quiet approval. When the boy departed, clutching the autograph like a treasure, Kenji raised an eyebrow. Still uncertain about your potential impact as a teacher? Kenta smiled ruefully. Point taken. As they prepared to leave, Kenta's phone chimed with a news alert. He checked it and paused, his expression thoughtful. The Tokyo exhibition is releasing a documentary about the lesson, he explained, showing Kenji the announcement. They want to interview both Chuck and me about the impact of that night. The promotional image showed a split-screen Kenta taunting Chuck at the beginning, and the two bowing to each other at the end. The contrast was striking. A before and after snapshot of transformation. Will you participate? Kenji asked. I think I must, Kenta said, finally. Not for publicity, but because that moment deserves honest reflection. It changed everything for me. Perhaps it could do the same for others. 6 weeks later, Kenta stood in the same Tokyo arena where his transformation had begun. The space was different now, no cheering crowds, just a small documentary crew setting up in the ring. He walked slowly around the empty arena, memories washing over him with each step. Here was where he had taunted Kenji's defeated form. There was where he had first spotted Chuck, and there at the center of the ring was where he had experienced the lesson that had altered his path. It feels smaller without the crowd, came a familiar voice. Kenta turned to find Chuck Norris approaching, dressed casually, looking remarkably unchanged. They bowed to each other simultaneously, then shook hands, a blend of traditional respect and modern friendship. Thank you for coming all this way, Kenta said sincerely. Chuck smiled. Some stories deserve to be told properly. The interviews lasted several hours. Chuck spoke with characteristic thoughtfulness about recognizing the potential in Kenta beneath the showmanship, about the responsibility that came with knowledge. Kenta spoke with honest vulnerability about his journey, from traditional sumo training to commercial fighting, from arrogance to humility, from performing strength to developing it authentically. When they were finally interviewed together in the center of the ring, The conversation turned to impact. Many viewed that night as the end of Kenta the Mountain Hoshida, the director noted. How do you see it? It was an ending, Kenta acknowledged. But more importantly, it was a beginning. The mountain didn't disappear, it just stopped trying to prove it was a mountain. Chuck, did you have any idea of the impact your demonstration would have? Videos of the lesson have been viewed hundreds of millions of times. Chuck shook his head slightly. I wasn't thinking about impact or audience. I was focused solely on the moment and the person in front of me. True teaching happens when you're fully present, not when you're performing for others. Many young fighters still look up to your previous persona, the director told Kenta. What do you say to them now? I would tell them that there's nothing wrong with entertainment or with making a living from your skills. But there's a difference between performing martial arts and living them. He gestured to the empty arena. The cheers fade. The sponsors move on. The money comes and goes. What remains is who you've become through your practice. If your training only makes you dangerous but not wise, powerful but not respectful, famous but not at peace with yourself, then regardless of your trophies or bank account, you've missed the true reward of martial arts. In this age of spectacle and social media, can traditional values survive? The director asked finally. Values don't disappear. They hibernate, Chuck replied. They retreat when not nourished. But they never vanish because they're rooted in something essential, the desire for meaning beyond momentary victory. Kenta nodded in agreement. We're not seeing an ending but a rebalancing. For a time, the pendulum swung toward spectacle and away from substance. Now it begins to return, not to reject entertainment, but to ensure it rests on a foundation of something deeper. Later, as they shared a quiet dinner far from the arena's bright lights, Chuck raised his teacup in a simple toast. To the path, he said. Kenta raised his own cup. To teachers who show it by walking it. Outside, Tokyo continued its restless pulse, neon and tradition, coexisting in dynamic tension. Within the restaurant, two martial artists from different worlds shared the quiet understanding that transcended those differences. The mountain had not been defeated. The legend had not dominated. Instead, both had been transformed through an encounter that reminded the watching world of a simple truth. True strength needs no announcement. It speaks through action, grows through humility, and lives through respect. In a world increasingly hungry for authenticity beneath spectacle, that lesson continued to resonate, not as a viral moment, but as an invitation to a path that had existed long before cameras and would endure long after they stopped rolling. The legacy of respect lived on, flowing like water, sometimes visible, sometimes hidden, but always shaping the landscape through which it passed. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.